Well, welcome back to Focus, your source for booze news. And craft beers are a big hit in Ontario, selling more by leaps and bounds every year at both the LCBO and the beer store. But government regulations and a monopoly are leaving business plans a little flat. Joining me to talk about that is Gary McMullen, president of Muskoka Brewery and a former chair of the Ontario Craft Brewers. Thanks so much for coming in. Give me a sense of how big the growth numbers are for craft brewing in Ontario.
Thanks for having me here today. Really appreciate it. I would say for the past 5 years, Ontario craft brewers have grown at a rate of 25 to 30% a year, each and every year.
Tough to imagine any other industry that's growing that big, that much.
Pretty fantastic. It's indicative of, obviously consumer interest in a growing category, which is fantastic for us. And in spite of that huge growth, craft beer in Ontario is still only 3.8% of the total beer market.
And how does that compare to other provinces?
BC is between 14 and 16%. Quebec would be hovering around 8 or 9%.
How come we're so far behind?
I think there's a piece related to, in Western Canada, for example, they're close to the Northwest Coast beer phenomenon, the craft beer growth that was really rapid out there in the northwestern U.S. I think the larger piece is if you compare jurisdictions, Ontario has two monopolies essentially. There's a government monopoly called the LCBO, and then there's a foreign-owned system called the beer store that controls. The beer store controls about 75 to 80% of the beer flowing in the province of Ontario.
Well, then let's talk about the beer store. What's the relationship that you have with them in terms of getting your product on the shelves?
So, there's two pieces to it. One, the folks that work hard at the beer store, in the stores, in the distribution centers, etc., they're fantastic folks, and they're just trying to do the right thing. I think where it gets broken is those people work for competitors of other breweries, and there can be no good situation where you have to sell your beer through a competitor. It's kind of like Ford having to sell its cars through a Toyota dealership. I'm not sure how that would work out for Ford.
We've talked to the beer store people on this show before, and they will claim that they feature craft beer prominently, that they have an interest in making sure that your industry is strong and strengthened. Do you believe that?
I think that when the beer store was created in 1927, the concept of brewers in Ontario coming together and owning a system where they shared in sales and distribution of their products made a whole lot of sense for the brewers, but also the consumers at a time. That system has devolved into a privately controlled monopoly with, I would say, very little control in place from the government, and that's problematic.
What do you need to grow the industry more?
I think craft brewers in Ontario want the opportunity to compete on a level playing field. That can come in many forms. At the end of the day, consumers want more access to beer as well. So whether that comes through, an enhanced LCBO system, or the ability of craft brewers to open stores to compete with the beer store, I think craft brewers are just saying, hey, we just want a fair drop of the puck, 5 guys on each side of the ice, and let's play hockey.
Should we do away with the beer store?
I think monopolies are dangerous.
Does that apply for the LCBO as well?
There are some great things about the LCBO in terms of social responsibility, etc. But at the end of the day, I think that over time, in order for an industry to be truly competitive, there has to be true private sector competition. And I think over 10, 15, 20 years, we'll see that outcome eventually in Ontario, and we've seen good successes in other provinces in the U.S. where the system have gone completely private.
Were you disappointed by the May provincial election that it wasn't a ballot question at all, expanding point of sale for alcohol in this province?
Not really. I wasn't surprised. The whole beverage alcohol question is always a challenging one for politicians to wrap their heads around, and
But the Tories at one point had said, well, we're going to do it, and then they kind of got scared off at the last moment.
Yeah, the water can feel pretty cold after you stick your toe into it and start to make waves. So I think at the end of the day, we're not surprised at the outcome, that it wasn't a ballot question. We continue to believe that more competition at the coalface, if you will, is good for the industry and good for consumers, which is at the end of the day what this is all about.
And we're talking about jobs in Ontario. These are all small businesses employing people in Ontario. It seems like a no-brainer that giving a leg up to your industry would put more people to work.
Yeah, I think, I would even say we're not necessarily looking for a leg up. We're just looking for equitable treatment. you know, 3.8% of the market belongs to Ontario craft brewers in Ontario. We have between 25 and 30% of the direct brewery jobs. So we're a huge job engine for any government that stands if they want to support the industry to help it grow.
Kathleen Wynne has a majority mandate. She has the power, really, to be able to bring in change. What would you ask her to do?
We're looking for, I would say, the government to take a view of looking seriously at legislative change in terms of the Liquor Control Act that controls the beer store, LCBO, etc., is outdated and needs to be reviewed, opened up, and there needs to be changes to that to make it more equitable.
All right, Gary McMullen, thank you very much for the Ontario Craft Brewers. Appreciate you coming in. Singing the financial blues in the big city, are you among those just barely making ends